Well, two requirements. If you're on this podcast right now listening to us, first and foremost is the conversation. And I know that you're not on this conversation with us right now, physically, mic on, but I hope we're prompting a conversation in you. We don't have enough conversations with ourselves at times. And I hope that's what this demonstrates. And we're going to talk about this word, a response to our conversation, initiates a response in you, or a conversation with God. Like those are good too.
That's good.
We want you to be a part of this conversation. The second thing is the biggest thing about the Founder Collective is, as Tamra expressed, is when we come into this, there's two things that we know. First, we have something to give and we have something to gain. That's the two things that have to be viable for a conversation to really occur. And that's where we had these quite often. We had these before the podcast. We would get in conversations with one another and we realized, man, more people need to be a part of this, because what we're talking about, the people we're talking to, demonstrates an invitation to unity, an invitation for growth, which our society needs so much. So I want to encourage you, if you don't do that in your life, if in the conversations you're a part of, if you walk in feeling like you have nothing to add, you need to realize in your confidence, it may be small, but you have something to add. Otherwise, you wouldn't be a part of that conversation. Second, if you're feeling really high and pumped up and prideful right now, let me help you. You need to let the air out, because you have something to gain as well. No matter if it's a conversation with your child, it's a conversation with somebody you're counseling, somebody you're mentoring, they have something to give to you. So just some thoughts. But Tamara, before we jumped into this, we kind of were just having a conversation that really prompted the thought process behind today. I've been preaching a sermon series on altered living, and that's ALTAR. And I talked a lot about how many times in the Old Testament, you'll see people have these revelations of who God is, and they give him a name, and then they build an altar and worship in that moment right there. So like Abraham, Jehovah Jireh, the God who provides, right after he was told to sacrifice his son, and then God provided a ram. Moses, right after he wins the battle where he had to have his arms held up, and he says, Jehovah Nisi, the Lord is my banner. Yeah. And in that moment, God said, write this down in a book and tell Joshua. Joshua's your next leader. He didn't even know this at that point, but he's taken the banner. So you got to tell him who the banner is. And then I preached on Gideon. When he was found in the midst of all his stuff, an angel appears, demonstrates himself by making this sacrifice catch on fire, and then he disappears, and there's fear that comes on Gideon, and the Lord says, peace to you, Gideon. And in that moment, he calls him Jehovah Shalom, or the Lord is peace. So in all those moments, right after that happened, they built an altar. And I expressed over the series that those revelation moments to us alter us. Mm-hmm. And it kind of culminated in Sunday with this conversation about our response. And I had the Bible, and I said, this, we have to read this, but the power is not in reading it. The power is in our response to it. Because we are designed, our bodies are designed to respond. It's the law of physics. The force on one thing causes an opposite or an equal or opposite reaction or force. If someone punches us, although we may stay strong and stand there, our body will respond in some way, whether it's pushed back or even the emotional response of punching them, or whatever it is. Yeah. We are designed to respond. We breathe in, and eventually you hold it, but it will come out, whether you pass out or not. Eventually, your body's going to force you to let it out. So our response is something that will naturally occur. So if you think about it, in our business, in our home, all the things, we respond, which is in conversation. Realistically, it's the difference between a debate and a conversation is, are we already organizing our response without ever realizing what we're responding to? Mm-hmm. That's the ability to listen, because if I listen to you, then my response is different than if I'm arguing with you, because I'm just trying to prove my point. So my response isn't even based on what you said. It's based on what I want you to know. Yeah. So response is so key in everything that we do, how we respond to people, when we respond to people, where we respond to people. So our response is there. So coming from my sermon series, what I said is when we meet Christ, we've had a lifetime of responses. And in this moment of meeting him, following him, what we're actually doing is shifting our response method, shifting our response mechanism, learning to respond differently, learning to respond more like him. So there's a lot in that. I'd love to hear kind of where your head's at right now in response.
Yeah, gosh, I thought about so many different ways that we respond, even non-verbally. Whenever I have conversations with Gary, if it's something that I don't want to hear, even though I am being very good, because we've done a lot of communication practice through therapy, thank God, my body naturally crosses its arms. Like I'm like, oh gosh. And I have to literally tell myself over and over again as he's talking, when I catch myself in that space, open your arms, open your arms, open your arms, as I'm trying to listen to what he's saying, because I want to receive what he has to say. He's my husband and he's doing it out of love and whatever it is that he's telling me. Sometimes it has nothing to do with me needing to like change. He's just calling me higher, and that feels like change. And so I don't feel comfortable in it. Then I thought about the
But real
response.
quick,
Yeah.
our middle child, Emma, it reminds me of her.
Yeah.
So we used to get onto her, and she would be physically upset. She
Yep.
would respond by crossing her arms and stomping up the stairs. So Morgan used to tell her, "Don't you cross those arms." So she would put her arms down as forcefully as she could beside her side and stomp upstairs. And I'm like, okay, she didn't cross her arms, but the response was still the same. So
Well, it
it is
goes back
funny.
to what you were saying from the giving and receiving. Are you listening to be heard, or are you listening to hear?
Mm,
And that is a totally different way to have a conversation with someone. And so altered living reminds me, probably because I love fashion, of Altered State, which is like a Christian clothing store in the
yeah.
mall. But to be in that place, there were also altars built based in their own desires. Right. And I think about how many altars before my encounter with the Lord, I had created my own personal altars. And whether it was a celebration of something in my flesh, whether it was a traumatic scenario in my life, and those became like these pillar points to my identity, versus when I was in that altered state of encounter and that altered state of finally listening for the first time. I'm super hard headed, for those of you who don't know me. And
Amen.
so
Oh, sorry.
being in that place where I was like, wow, like none of those actually create my identity. None of those actually should determine or decipher the way in which I respond to other people, or especially the way in which I should respond to myself. I mean, and I still am pretty hard on myself. And that's like that recovering achiever in me. And yet at the same time, I also know, we were talking about this previously in the Founder Collective table, which we highly encourage you to come and sit at that table too. It is an open mic conversation every Wednesday at 12 o'clock Eastern.
How do they become
Shameless
a
plug.
part of that? We say that sometimes, but how
Yeah.
can they become a part of that table?
Show up. Like literally, if you click on the link there, it's in the show notes right now. It's open table to anyone. And so you just literally register. It gets on your calendar, and there's no RSVP needed. You can pop in. If you're going to be late, come. If you're going to show up or leave early, come anyway. There's always something to be had. And what I love, even as Bill was sharing today, Bill Schomburg, one of our loyal table members, he hangs out with us often. He said, I came today just to listen, and yet I'm feeling prompted to share. And it's just like this conversation. Altered living, an altered state of understanding who God is when you come to give and to receive. God's going to prompt you. He's going to prompt you into something. But we have to not be so hard-headed to think that we're only here to give or we're only here to receive. And I can even do that myself, and we all can, with biblical knowledge, with business knowledge, with marital knowledge, with parenting knowledge, right? How often do we do this to our kids? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's my way or the highway. I remember my parents saying that, or like, this is the truth. Well, there's a new truth to society than there was when we were younger. And so now it's not on the fictitious truth or the fallible truth, but it's like, what does God say about that? Let's come to him.